of advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness. Starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to the Recovery Report Live, Global Pro's deep dive into relevant insurance topics, providing actionable takeaways and valuable insights. We aim to update, educate, and inform you weekly. I'm Dan Odess, president of Global Pro, where we manage risk to recovery. For more than a decade, we have represented thousands of business owners and community associations in the placement of insurance and the recovery from more than $1 billion worth of loss. We are your one source for insurance news you can use. I'm super excited today to be joined by two incredibly talented lawyers, two top legal minds to our broadcast. We got Julie Dick and Wayne Pathman of the Pathman Lewis Law Firm. Pathman Lewis, for more than 2 decades, have consistently recognized as one of Miami's premier and innovative law firms. The firm provides legal counsel in multiple practice areas with a heavy emphasis on litigation and real estate. Our guests have particularly taken an interest in environmental issues impacting our local communities, sea level rise, and resiliency. Among many other things, Wayne has served as the past chairman of the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce, served as the chairman of the City of Miami Sea Level Rise Committee, and recently he was voted best lawyers in America, and Florida Trend recognized him as one of the 500 top most influential people in Florida. What a tongue twister that was, Wayne. Julie is certainly not in Wayne's shadow, as she's been recognized by countless organizations as a leader and voice for policy and code changes that benefit not only our business community, but also the environment. So I welcome you and Wayne and Julie. Thank you guys for joining us here today. And I want to kick this off because with Julie, ladies first and all, Wayne, so be patient. I know you have a lot to say. But Julie, there's a lot going on right now. This has been a heck of a start to a new decade, that's for sure. 2020 rolled in fast, and certainly I don't think no matter how much planning and preparation you had, you've been impacted. Our business, our communities have been impacted by this one way or the other. But just more recently, we saw a lot of storm activity and flooding that has really, truly impacted us here locally. And I want to stay local and talk about some of those local issues. And I want to, first question I'd like to pose is, what is your opinion? Is South Florida ready?
There are a lot of variables in terms of risk for flooding across the state and across South Florida. In some communities have really been putting a lot of resources into preparing for increased flooding. And, it's interesting you talk about flooding here from storms. For years, I think we talked about just sea level rise is one of the risks we're preparing for, but actually increased flash flooding is one of our major risks from climate change as a region moving forward. So if you go to the municipal meetings and wherever else, generally in the resilience community, flash flooding and preparing for flash flooding is something that you hear a lot of discussion about. And then in some cases, and unfortunately not across the board, you see communities that are really investing in infrastructure and changing their planning and zoning and land use to be able to accommodate and better prepare for these kinds of events. And unfortunately, they're becoming more frequent.
And they're becoming more frequent, and it seems like it's impacting a much larger area. And I like to get into just a bit of detail on this stuff because Memorial Day weekend was certainly a wet one for us here in South Florida. The way above average rainfall that we saw in our areas, and then across the country, there was other things like in Michigan where you had 2 dams failing, more than 10,000 people impacted, 3,500 homes. These statistics that we're hearing from some of these events is just as incredible. And to your point, this is certainly not something that, and it continues to evolve. So even the words that we're using to talk about these things have evolved. We used to talk about business continuity. Now everyone's talking about resiliency. So not that you shouldn't plan for continuity. It's just that we want to use more broad words because the planning has become more general and broad. And these weather events that are occurring, like the third named storm, CRISTOBAL, impacting Louisiana, tremendous flooding in an area that just constantly is battling these issues. And I mean, thinking back to, one of the most devastating, it would be like Katrina in Louisiana. So Wayne, what does this all mean for our business community? And touching on something Julie said about the different coding and planning, where are we going here?
Well, I think that, we have become more knowledgeable over the last 10 years about the impacts from flooding, sea level rise, and we're starting to take, the precautions that are necessary, starting to rebuild infrastructure, but a lot still has to be done. We're not anywhere near the end of the road. We're just at the very beginning. But if you remember just a couple of years ago when Sawgrass Mills, which is the second largest attraction in Florida, believe it or not, was flooded out and was closed for 3 days. That may not be an isolated event in the future. That may be something that happens seasonally until they redo the infrastructure or redo things in order to combat the type of flooding that they experience. But we're going to see that more and more in other areas, even in downtown Miami on Brickell Avenue. When we had the heavy rain a couple of weeks ago, we had a lot of flooding in the streets. So all of this affects business. And ultimately what it does is it identifies areas that are low-lying, that will flood frequently from flash flooding or heavy rains or rain bombs. And therefore you'll see cost of insurance going up. You'll see where infrastructure has to change. So you'll see construction. And ultimately, I also think that eventually you'll see changes in building and zoning codes that will require businesses to build differently and comply with new zoning regulations, which will add cost to projects and developments throughout our community. This is not something that is an isolated incident for this time, like for this season, if we have an active season. This is the future. This is what we're going to see over the next 5, 10, 15, 30 years as we start to evolve and deal with flooding and sea level rise.
And you're a bit of a Nostradamus when it comes to these rate increases that you just touched on. Dating back to a 2018 Real Deal article titled "Miami Advisors: Sea Level Rise May Inflate Federal Insurance Premiums by 2021." Well, you definitely got that right. It happened a year early, and I'm sure it's going to happen again because here in 2020, we saw that rate increase. And as of April, we saw between 5 to 15% rate increase. What's next? I mean, what does 2021 and beyond bring us?
Well, there's a program that is already basically been designed by the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, which is then administered by FEMA, called the 2.0 plan. But Congress has been kicking this plan down the road every year because they don't want the rates to skyrocket. So it's planned now to be introduced in 2021. But that will be the new format of how rates will be decided, and that in high risk areas, you're going to see potentially major increases over time. You mentioned earlier about flooding in the Midwest. Florida is the largest contributing state to the National Flood Insurance Program. We contribute about 39% of all dollars collected, and we have the most policies in Florida, which means that we're paying for the losses in other parts of the country. My feeling, and something that I've advocated in the past, is that we have so much money leaving Florida to help other states. Will it ever return? And the answer to that, I believe, is no. When we need it most, not just for hurricanes, but when we have constant flooding due to sea level rise, that money's not coming back. We're just going to see our rates skyrocket. So when the 2.0 plan comes into effect, it's starting to shift to what they call a risk-based assessment, where the higher the risk, the more cost for insurance. And clearly, with the most coastline in the United States, in the state of Florida, we're going to see a lot of increased premiums throughout the state, and cost of insurance is going to start increasing 20, 25% or more every year.
And so what we're talking about here is what the government's doing to help protect us against that risk by they created this national flood insurance program to do that stuff. So it's a great transition to talk about some of the things that are going on here locally and maybe with the federal government as it relates to resiliency. And I know, Julie, you have quite a bit of knowledge as it comes to this. In reading your bio and getting to know a little bit about you, certainly an authority on this. So what are some of the important policy and code changes we are seeing down the line and the opportunities they may create for property owners? Because as you know, certainly investment in South Florida has peaked. Certainly during this pandemic, I would say that a lot more interest and focus in trying to get to our vacation-like environment. So what opportunities lie ahead of us?
Sure. Well, all coastal cities in Florida are right now required to do some kind of planning for sea level rise. If you have to do a coastal element in your comprehensive plan, then the state is saying you need to plan for sea level rise and reduce your risk and vulnerability for new development. Some cities have really taken that more seriously and have been more invested in sort of in infrastructure and bond programs, but also in updating their codes and updating their guidelines for development. And what you see, I think this is the case in Miami Beach and other places right now, is they're really looking for ways to encourage the private sector to invest in resilience in a way that sort of complements the municipal investments. So where you see raising roads, they may be looking at like, how can we encourage all these buildings surrounding these roads that are being raised and where the city's making investments to also prepare so they're set to withstand several more feet of sea level rise, or can really extend the viability of those properties much further into the future. And hopefully that will also lead to reducing the insurance risks and everything else as we're moving forward. So I think you have right now at the municipal level, a lot of opportunity, depending on the city. I mean, some cities are really advanced and there's opportunities to really just jump right in and really ask for things that you wouldn't have been able to ask for before in connection with resilience. On the other side, in terms of financing, I think there's some exciting news just for the region from the federal government. I mean, we have this, what the Army Corps of Engineers calls a Back Bay study. It's a 3-year, $3 million study covering a pretty large area of Miami-Dade County, where they're looking at how can we protect this area from storm surge. And it's really specific to storm surge, but when we think about it, those storm surge, the things we do to reduce risk from storm surge are also going to help with just general flood attenuation, dealing with sea level rise, dealing with flash flooding. And they released a draft environmental impact statement, I believe this week or last week, that puts forth a $4.6 billion plan for Miami-Dade County.
That was with a B, right? With a billion? Yeah.
$4.6 billion plan. And it'll be like other, major Army Corps infrastructure projects where you have a federal cost share and probably a local partner. In most cases, for the Corps, that's been the state, but we'll see how that works out here. But you'll have a 65% cost share from the federal government to pay for major changes. So in inland, they're proposing really higher seawalls. How do we close off the rivers in the case of a storm surge? But then for some of the barrier islands, it was very interesting to me to see that there are what they're calling non-structural changes, which the way they're defining it is really property owners, giving property owners some of the financing and funding to elevate their properties, the buildings. So that they're going to be looking at where are there vulnerable structures that, through these government programs, there can be financing to help make those structures more resilient and more prepared for sea level rise. So that's going to be part of it. And it may be elevating the buildings, it may be flood proofing. I mean, you see in the Keys, a lot of structures and everything else where they're set up to be able to accept water if there's a major storm event and then let it flow through and it's gone. So they don't, but you're not losing the whole structure if there's a major storm surge. So I think you see a lot of innovations like that where the cities and the municipalities are trying to encourage these behaviors. And at the same time, we have a potential for great federal partnership and financing to help, and funding, not financing, but funding to help move some of these initiatives forward in a way that helps the private sector as well as the general region and community.
And for all of this to take place, it takes quite a bit of planning, and obviously a lot of that monetary investment goes to that planning. I mean, I saw it after Superstorm Sandy, which absolutely devastated the Northeast coastline. We saw a big proponent of the rebuilding and it was actually elevating buildings. Got a little crazy and a lot out of control, and then finally the code enforcement stepped in and stopped some of these couple 1,000-square-foot homes and all of a sudden become 5-story properties when they were a 2-story just to get to the first floor. So it got a lot of control. But the idea was that if I'm going to rebuild my property, I might as well make it more resilient to an event like this occurring in the future. So, that is an absolute tremendous investment, over $4 billion. And I know you've been very a big proponent of the back-based studies and doing a lot of investment there, and what that could mean for South Florida investment. And Wayne, you went on record saying that the city needed to do a 40-year plan, and made a comment regarding drastic rate increases and stifling the real estate investment in South Florida. What did you see change since 2018?
Well, I think that we're seeing a lot more dialogue with regards to dealing with stormwater infrastructure, sea level rise. Many cities now have their own chief resiliency officer. They have committees that are formed to start dealing with infrastructure. They're dealing with issues at both the state, county, and federal level on trying to map the future of stormwater planning, dealing with things like septic tanks and how to eradicate them, dealing with issues related to changing of building codes or zoning codes, which you're seeing happening in Miami Beach and other cities. I think that we're still a long way away from where we need to be. We have issues like gentrification issues that need to be addressed that are very important to our community. We also have to work about how to create planning. Why I came up with the idea of the 40-year plan was something that the committee that I chaired for 5 years, we presented that to the City Commission of Miami, that by looking at this for over a 40-year period and implementing some type of plan showing progress, will tell the world that Miami is taking it seriously, that we are looking at stormwater and sea level rise to try to create a more sustainable and resilient community. I think this is really important to send the message to developers, residents, people looking to move here in the future, and generally any financial institution that has investment in South Florida, that we have a plan. And we need to do that. We need to come up with a plan that shows the world over the next 40 years, here's what we envision in South Florida. It should be a working document that can change from time to time as issues change or financially. Like, for instance, nobody could have predicted the pandemic and what impact that may have financially on our community. Dollars that may have been earmarked for infrastructure or stormwater now may have to be used for other things. But it has to be a working document that shows that the world that we are taking sea level rise and flooding seriously.
Yeah, and all of this goes to resiliency, and I talked about we early on about continuity. Continuity becomes resiliency, and about protecting our investments. I myself, as Wayne, we live on the water, and I'm in Coconut Grove. You're on Miami Beach, and we're all somehow connected though because of the water. So how we plan and change the lands can drastically impact, because basically what we're trying to do is displace the water. So Julie, when we talk about resiliency, what does that mean for a city like Miami and its future? And how are we best prepared for that next, quote, let's say, big event?
Sure. I think we have examples of what resiliency looks like in this region. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot, but really it's a proliferation of those types of projects and the type of planning that we see in sort of little pockets throughout the region. I would use the example of Coral Gables when they redid Geralda and that they put a walking road there. That's actually, last year you heard people talking about that was the most resilient street in the country. The day after Irma, businesses there were opening and didn't have flooding. And previously they'd had major flooding, but that was designed correctly. And there was a real effort, really, you have to give a lot of credit to the city of Coral Gables in that situation, but they put in really innovative infrastructure that, they didn't have to use pumps. They're not having the water quality index that we see in some areas, but where the water and flooding is draining really well. And they have incredible water retention capacity, and they have the ability for trees to really grow in that area, protecting the walkable area there from increased heat impacts and everything else. So you see projects like that, they're great examples of what we can do on a much broader scale throughout the region. So I think looking at sort of the best practices and finding ways to amplify those is great. But resilience for the region is also going to mean like significant land use and zoning decisions, honestly, in planning, where we have a vision of like Wayne said, and I think that's starting to manifest itself, but we need a vision for what this region will really look like. And the land use and zoning and where buildings are and where water is going to change. You know, we might have a lot of parks throughout the area that are able to take water and deal with flooding so that we have dry areas that we can function on and have economic activity and business continuity. But and we're moving towards that, but that's what it's going to look like, is really having that plan that is implemented over time. And it's going to have to take a combination of significant private and public sector investment. But fortunately, we see that the return on investment in resilience is very good. I mean, I think there are some studies saying, you know, for every dollar, it's $4 return for government. And then in some cases, it's even in a better return on investment. So it makes sense to put resources into these things because it pays back. But it's going to take time, and we need to see really an increase in these efforts. Like, I think we're kind of dabbling in them in a lot of areas, but we need resilience built into the DNA of how government decisions are made, how business decisions are made in this area. Project.
Yeah, and having the conversation early on and continuing the conversation. A lot of people get hot on issues, and then you see them go away from it, then they come back to it. But being consistent with it and having a consistent voice and planning and prepping for that big event, and making sure that our communities are resilient is certainly everything that everyone would want, especially for South Florida. Absolute hub for, you know, whether it's for vacationers or for all of us who live here and call this home. It's so important that we do take care of not only our homes, our community, but also environment, and plan for how is this water getting displaced and how does it impact that. And I know you've been integral in a lot of those studies. I really enjoyed our conversation here today, guys. It's been awesome. A lot of valuable information. Two leaders in our community certainly making an impact, going way above and beyond, and volunteering your time on many, many different panels and conversations that are important to all of us. And without people like you, not much would get done, and we certainly would see a worse off situation than we have already. So very appreciative of that, and thank you both for joining us here today. And Wayne, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience here how they can contact the Pathman Lewis firm for all of their legal needs.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and thank you again for having Julie and I. We really appreciate it. Certainly is a very important topic, especially as we head into hurricane season here in South Florida. You can look us up on our website, which is just Pathman Lewis LLP, and you'll find all the information on what we do. My email is wpathman@pathmanlewis.com. Julie's is jdick@pathmanlewis.com. We are, easily accessible through Zoom meetings, phone, email. We have been spending a lot of time with developers and working with government on cooperation between the private and public sector, or even working on P3s in trying to establish, whether it be new building or zoning and development, and how the government and private sector should be working together to tackle this very important topic. So we've represented property owners, apartment owners, hotel owners, developers in this issue, because it is a topical issue. It is something that everyone is having to deal with. And our law practice is geared to do that from the zoning side, the environmental side, and the planning side. So we appreciate the opportunity of being on your wonderful show, Daniel. You're a great host.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. And for our audience, stay tuned. We're going to continue on with the Recovery Report Live. And again, thank you guys for joining us. And I wish you the best, and stay dry, and have a great rest. Have a great weekend and the rest of the day.
Thank you, Daniel. You too.
Thank you, Daniel. Bye-bye.
So as an update for our audience here, and what's going on in our world with as we head out and get it back to business, where we're seeing a lot of our communities return to normal operations, it's important that we stay updated on the latest things that are going on. And, we saw a major storm go through the Gulf Coast and impact the coastal areas there. This storm is CRISTOBAL, but it went far inland. CRISTOBAL swept into the Gulf Coast in the first week of June and triggered massive storm surge, almost 6 feet of storm surge they reported along the northern part of the Gulf Coast. You saw incredible heavy rain and flooding in Florida. As far north as Wisconsin and Minnesota, just put that in perspective. With all the other things that are going on that are impacting our community, between the rioting, the protests, to murdering hornets, to still dealing with a pandemic and a rise of infections that are being reported. We're having tornadoes that are being spawned in Florida from this storm, and as well as in Louisiana. And you have this record-setting tropical depression impacting as far north as some of the northern states from Wisconsin. Certainly a way to set the tone for the storm season, because we just got started, ladies and gentlemen, and we it's our third one. We're still monitoring other systems and movements out there. I read it like the daily news when I roll over every morning, just to make sure that we are planning and prepared for what's to happen. So it's important that you get out there and you check your sources. I always recommend you go right to, which is NOAA. They're the authority when it comes to hurricane and anything related to the weather. Certainly look at the Doppler readings, but really important as business owners and community associations that you are practicing preparedness and you are being consistent in that preparedness. The moment that we let our guard down is when we get caught off guard, and you will waste a lot of time. You may even lose some lives, and you may actually lose your business. So you want to protect your community. You want to protect your unit owners, your employees, yourself, your families. You want to stay prepared. You want to be vigilant. And I think CRISTOBAL is a real good reminder of that. Hit here right in the beginning of the storm season, third storm of the year. And some of the trends that we're seeing as it relates to some of the disasters and the recent pandemic is that the lawsuits continue to get filed. And there is a tremendous amount of insurance companies still sitting on their hands. We're not hearing a whole lot of overwhelming success stories of where an insured got the recovery from their insurance company and turned around and got back to business. No, they're grinding it out. They're relying more so than ever on their employees, on their suppliers to help them get back to business. They're relying on the local community to give them free or different opportunities to engage new audiences. It's not the insurance companies that have stepped up. It's the business owners and their employees and our communities that have rallied together to help our business owners. At some point, we hope the insurance companies turn around and come to the aid of our business community and do the right thing and start paying some of these claims, because without a doubt, a lot of these policies make no mention of virus, communicable diseases, or microorganisms or anything like that. They're completely void of the topic as it relates to anything such as this. And the fact is that, and I do truly believe that many of these claims will get paid. But the time will tell. And categorically, there's ones that will get paid and there's those that are not. There's no guarantee to the process, but it's something that you, again, like with your preparedness, you need to stay vigilant. You need to adjust the claim. You need to look to your advisors and an assistant and gain the assistance you need as a business owner to understand what it is to get back to business and what's the map forward. And that's what we do a lot here at Global Pro, working with our business owners and making sure that they have the tools and information they need on a daily basis to make sure that they have what they need in order to continue operating even in the worst times, because our job is 24/7, 365. In fact, in a recent article, one expert opined that Florida is likely to attract a disproportionately high share of insurance class actions stemming from COVID-19. Why? Because the state's population density and favorable case law towards policyholders when contract terms are ambiguous. That's a mouthful, but basically what it's saying is that the policies are devoid of this issue, and they do not specifically address it. And arguably, because it's ambiguous, contract terms should be construed to the benefit of the policyholder. So we'll see how it pans out. Again, no guarantee. There is a path forward, and right now that path forward is being forged by our business owners, their community, and their employees, and not the help of the insurance companies largely. We're seeing, every so often you'll catch a little article here or there about something going on, but for the large part, for most of our business community, it has been at their own. Been on their own, and they're grinding it out and trying to get back to business. In the educational portion of our broadcast here today, I want to talk about community associations specifically and address this issue. It was just raised to me the other day when a community association was dramatically impacted by a recent water pipe break, and they had water and damage throughout multiple floors and dozens of units. The issue is not unique to community associations, because you do see some businesses that may have the same issue arise, and where they're trying to recover. And let's say you have carpet or tile or some type of finish on every single floor, and you planned a construction project to improve your property, and you went through this voting process to pick a particular material that was not going to be on one floor, but was going to be on all the floors. And for a business owner, maybe it was a decision that you wanted all of your office to be uniformly the same, and that's how you intend it to always be. And when you have a loss and you seek that recovery from your insurance company, you'd expect them to turn around and pay you for pay you the enough money to restore the property to what it was 1 second before the loss occurred, or the damage took hold of the property, and you want to restore your property to that pre-loss condition. But a lot of associations struggle when they see their insurance companies decide to only pay for, let's say, one floor of damage or one office rather than all the offices, and they no longer make that or manufacture that carpet in that, or even if they do, as many of us have learned, when you're trying to restore or replace portions of carpet, it can no longer be the same as others. And it's really not about matching. It's about restoring the property. And if we focus on that issue alone, a lot of times we can prevail in those issues, because we're really not asking for matching. What we're asking the insurance company to do is what? Restore us to a pre-loss condition, exactly what we paid for. And we want to make sure they do that, and do that promptly by actually investigating our loss. And one of the trends we talked about in a prior broadcast was about these virtual inspections, and I think in some regard that actually is being missed in some of these valuations, because the policyholder is focused on one area of damage and not realizing that the area of damage is the entirety of the area where all of that flooring or finishes or whatever that was insured by that policy have all been negatively impacted or are not of the value they were prior to the loss. And that's what your insurance is there to pay for, the value of those sticks and bricks and the labor to put it back. So we want to make sure that you're restored to your pre-loss condition. And that's what you're asking of your insurance company to do. It's not a line of sight issue. It's not a continuous area. It's not matching. It's do what I paid you for, which is to restore me to a pre-loss condition. But in order to do that, you need to establish a value of what your damages are worth, the replacement cost value. But you also have to do something called, you have to establish what's called the actual cash value, the depreciated amount of the replacement cost value, because we can all agree that over time things do wear and tear. But the funny thing about actual cash value is that nowhere in any policy that I've ever seen does it stipulate as to how that's supposed to be calculated. But unfortunately, in a recent case, it was held that you as a policyholder in this policy were required to actually stipulate the amount of the ACV, or the actual cash value. So on one hand, it's pretty easy to establish what your replacement cost value is, because that's what it costs to actually restore your property at the current value. And what your insurance company is requiring you to do, in theory, is to apply some reasonable amount of depreciation to it, to those building materials that were damaged by that covered loss. And how do you do that? Well, when I was studying industrial engineering and when I was in college, we reviewed an enormous amount of depreciation tables when we were looking at purchasing and installing machinery and the development of factories in order to be able to produce and manufacture materials that were going to be used in a lot of the aerospace industry. And the funny thing about that is that we looked at volumes of documents and papers and many resources in order to try to establish that value. It sometimes would take us weeks, if not months, to try to put together the appropriate depreciation tables. And then there was hundreds of theories on how you actually calculate it once you figure it out at what factor or at what rate it was supposed to depreciate it. And I can't assume, I would assume that no policyholder could reasonably have access to that type of information, despite, in some ways, a court or your policy requiring you to do that in order to actually get paid for a claim. So it's not to say that you won't get your claim if you can't do it. It's to say that in some regard, if your policy calls for it, you may be wise to try to figure out a reasonable amount that can be associated with that said depreciation in order to comply with certain policy language and provisions in it. But how you do that or get there does require some expertise. And I have at times engaged, whether it's forensic accountants or mechanical engineers that are experts in this field to help me, or industrial engineers to help me figure out what depreciation table, by what factor something needs to be done, and gone through an extensive study to be able to determine those things. So you're really put at odds here, and really you're disadvantaged by these said requirements if it's even fact required by your policy. But it's important to understand it, and it may be a something that you need to be aware of if you're making a claim based on policy conditions and language. So look deep into your policy, understand that this issue may exist. It's something that you should be aware of. It is a very deep, dark, and complicated topic, and certainly it's nothing that I can cover today here with you, or even provide you a very good example of what to do and how to actually calculate it. But I will give you one general example, and a general example would be like a window. And when someone asks you to calculate depreciation of a window, or you're supposed and you're supposed to try to figure it out, think about the things that actually wear and tear on the window. All the parts of a window don't wear and tear at the same rate. And any reasonable person would agree that the gasket on the window would probably wear and tear faster than, let's say, the frame or the finish on the frame or the glass itself. And so a lot of times what I see is adjusters wrongly put what's called straight line depreciation, which is basically saying, oh, the window has a 15-year useful life, and it's 3 years old, so 3 over 15, and they get a percentage, and then they take that percentage and they multiply it by the replacement cost value of the window. And let's say the window was $1,000 or whatever it is. So they're going to take 3 over 15 times that $1,000, and that's the amount that they're going to say is the depreciation amount, and they'll subtract that from the $1,000. Well, the fact is that they are depreciating the entire window system and not each part of the window. And what's important about that is that you're going to get to an erroneous value that's going to be not to the benefit of the insured, and that's why it doesn't work. So, and I do see the insurance company's adjuster do that all the time. So if we're going to be real about this, we should probably be depreciating really nothing more than, let's say, the gasket, or at best the finish on the actual frame of the window, because the frame itself, the aluminum that the frame is made out of, in most instances, it's really not wearing and tearing unless it's broken. And if it's broken, it needs to be replaced. And if it needs to be replaced, then, or the entire system needs to be replaced, well, then maybe we do apply depreciation to the entirety of the system in some way that is to the benefit of the insured. But again, you gotta get into the details and figure out what it is that you're claiming for. Are you claiming for the replacement of the window? Are you claiming for the repair of that window? And in each situation, you need to do the calculation a little bit different. So if your head isn't spinning by now, then you're not paying attention. But it's an important issue. It's a real issue, and it's something hidden within a lot of policies, including your flood insurance policy, that if you don't comply with those conditions of the policy, you may find yourself without a recovery. And so we want to make sure, again, the purpose of this broadcast is to give you information you can use. And so I'm telling you right now, look at your policy, consider that information, and ask the right question to your experts here at Global Pro. By contacting your agent or your broker, you may get some information regarding how your actual insurance was sold to you, and may give you some insight as to what you may expect down the road. But do reach out to claim experts like Global Pro to help you navigate the process, to prepare for your next loss, and to make sure that you do calculate your claim appropriately so you're not prejudicing yourself from any sort of portion of that recovery. And that brings me to the last portion of our broadcast here and talking about our community. Obviously, we've seen the fallouts of the recent events and the riots that have impacted many of our communities throughout the country and abroad. And I want to focus in on the damage to some of the businesses, and talk specifically about the impacts of the looting and the shutdown as it relates to trying to calculate your loss of income. We've been fielding quite a bit of questions for some business owners that have been impacted by those that we represent, and how we're going to go about calculating that income loss. Because what's important what's important to look at in your policy, as I'm trying to say, is how you're going to determine the period of restoration. And a lot of businesses just got out of dealing with the pandemic and getting slowly back to business. And maybe they weren't even operating 100%. Some restaurants are only allowed to seat 50% of occupancy. So you're not really back to business as usual, but you're getting back to business. And all of a sudden, your business is shut down, it's looted, it's damaged and destroyed, and now you can't even operate at 50%. It creates yet a very confusing situation. It's an issue that we actually touch on in a recent publication of ours, the Claims Advocate. And I encourage all of you to go online, go to the resource section of our website and download the latest version of it. It will be going live. It'll give you some important information as it relates to calculating or determining and distinguish between one loss to the next, and how the overlapping damages may be distinguishable and can help you and lead you towards a recovery. So we want to make sure that you're aware of this. Don't ignore it. Don't just assume, oh my God, my business was shut down from the pandemic first, so I can't recover for the looting and the rioting, or the shutdown of my business because of the civil authority as it relates to the rioting and civil commotion. Because rioting and civil commotion, and even the insurance industry has come out and said, there's very few policies in the country that will actually exclude or even limit coverage for it. So if you do have coverage for it and your business was shut down from that civil authority, or worse, you had looting and destruction to your property from rioting, it's important that you do put your insurance companies on notice of it, and you contact experts like ourselves that can help you evaluate what your actual income damage or losses are associated with this event, because it is separate and different than the issues relating to the pandemic. Or maybe you were affected by CRISTOBAL. So then you have 3 overlapping losses or damages, and you need to make sure that you can distinguish between one from the next. And it's in order to make sure that you recover 100% of the money that's entitled to you. So something I wanted to draw your attention to, something important we wanted to talk about today. But again, and to reiterate, go online, check us out at getglobalpro.com/resources. You can read, download, view all of the information that we have there for our policyholders. It highlights the newest feature. It highlights the newest things that we were talking about, newest trends, things that are going on that can help you and your business plan for the next event and make sure that you have that business continuity and you are resilient. And if that's not enough for you, check us out on YouTube. Go online, go to your social media, Facebook, Instagram. We're everywhere. We're all there. Check us out, follow us, like our page, engage us, ask us questions. We encourage all of our audience and our guests to constantly ask us questions. Reach out to us 24/7, 365. We are your resource for all things insurance. So thank you again to our audience. We really appreciate you tuning in here today. Please feel free to connect with us. If you need to contact us, reach us by phone, 855-487-7475, 855-487-7475. And again, go online, social media, we're there, constantly updating, providing the information that you can use on a daily basis. Thank you, and we'll see you next week on the Recovery Report Live.